So first, I want to just say thank you so much for joining us, Secretary Kennealy. I know that you have been at the center of a lot of what we have been seeing over the past 4 months during this pandemic, and I know that you have been incredibly communicative and transparent, helping the business community, chambers of commerce, associations, et cetera, with weekly conference calls to help us, to guide us, and to get our questions answered for our constituents. And I found that highly powerful coming from state government, and I truly appreciated it certainly from my point of view, and I'm sure a lot of the business owners throughout the Commonwealth did as well. I just wanted to say thank you to our sponsor today, which is North Shore Bank. We have, this whole initiative this morning is part of our Government Affairs committee, which is there to help guide our business owners during through any kind of small or large business issue. And certainly the pandemic has created a multitude of business issues for our small business owners. Our moderator today is Kyle Perzanowski, who is with North Shore Bank, and he's also one of the co-chairs of our Government Affairs Committee. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. He's going to lead us with all the questions that you submitted. We will, if we have time, of course, have some Q&A. Use the chat below. Please mute yourselves. And I'm very grateful, Secretary, for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks,
Kyle,
Leslie.
over to you.
All right.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you everyone for joining us, especially you, Mike. This is an amazing privilege that we have you on today. I wear a couple of hats today, as Leslie mentioned, and first and foremost, I'll be wearing my sponsor hat from North Shore Bank. And I won't take up too much time speaking on behalf of North Shore Bank, except to say that for those of you who are struggling right now during this time, get to know your banker. Please get to know your banker if you haven't already. It is so important to have a conversation with your commercial lender, have a conversation with your branch manager, have them get to know you and your business, because it is during these tough times that if your bank knows you and knows your business, they can pivot quickly and help you quickly. North Shore Bank was able to help hundreds of businesses get the loans that they needed, the PPP loans, the SBA loans that they needed, because we know our customers. And we didn't just wait for people to come to us, we came to them. And as maybe some of you know, that can make or break the difference here between getting a loan or not getting a loan in the time that you need it, especially when funding can be uncertain. So again, if there's any message that you can take away from North Shore Bank today, it's get to know a banker. And if you have any questions, you can find me on the web, North Shore Bank, northshore-bank.com. Look for Kyle Perzanowski at the Brimble Ave branch. All right, I'm taking off the sponsorship hat. Co-chair hat is on. So as Leslie mentioned, the Government Affairs Committee, part of the Greater Beverly Chamber of Commerce, our mission is to bring information to our business community. And I won't take any more time up. I want to turn this over to Mike, because Mike has so much great information for all of you. We are going to do the Q&A at the end, but please, as Mike is speaking, feel free to enter your questions or your comments in the chat box, and we'll address it at the conclusion of Mike's statement. And without any further ado, Mike, again, thank you so much for being with us. I know that you have quite a crazy schedule. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, Kyle, thank you so much. Big thank you to you and Leslie for having me here today. And as Kyle mentioned, you know, the banks have really stepped up in this environment to provide needed capital to small businesses. I know North Shore was an active lender in the Paycheck Protection Program, so thanks for that. And Leslie, good to see you. I know Leslie was a great member of our Economic Development Planning Council last year, helping us develop our economic development plan. So, and of course, always great to be with Senator Lovely and Mayor Cahill. Great to see you all. And I see Andrew DeFranza here as well. Has been a great partner for us on a number of affordable housing projects. So great to see you all today. I thought what I might do is spend a few minutes and talk about the, well, generally how we've tried to address the pandemic and its impacts, particularly the economic impacts in my world now across the state. and talk a bit about the reopening process. And I'll be somewhat brief because I do want to hear questions on what's on people's minds. But going way back to March, it was March 10th, the governor declared a state of emergency, and shortly thereafter, the creation of the COVID Command Center, which was meant to be and is a focal point for all of our collective activities across the administration to address the pandemic and its impacts. It's been an incredible 5 months for all of us, all of us trying to leverage the capabilities and assets of state government to do what we can do. And I think, and we then, as we got into May and April rather, started to think about the reopening process. But obviously there were some very, very tough decisions made around the essential and non-essential business designations going back to March. That was really the start of the economic impact, decisions on gathering sizes, but really trying to put in place a set of protocols and practices that would help slow the spread of the virus. As we got into muted myself there, sorry. As we got into April, we knew it was time to start to reopen the economy, and the governor announced the formation of the Reopening Advisory Board, co-chaired by myself and the Lieutenant Governor. And I'll talk a bit about the work there. But our board was comprised of 17 members. We had 3 from the healthcare community, 3 from municipal government, and 11 from business, all across the state, representing a variety of sectors and regions and perspectives. And let me just say a couple of things on that. First, I'm always incredibly grateful for the members of the Reopening Advisory Board who invested a lot of time with us over the April-May timeframe. And for the folks who came in to present to us. We had 75 different business groups and community coalitions and labor groups come in and talk to us. We probably did about 50 hours of Zoom calls. The groups we talked to represent about 112,000 companies, about 2 million employees. So we got a lot of input along the way. And we were always mindful of 2 things as we tried to come up with this reopening strategy. One is that this is work that's never been done before. I mean, no one's ever had to develop a strategy to reopen an economy that was largely closed. And the second contextual point is that Massachusetts was and is among the hardest hit states by COVID-19. And so if you look at our reopening report, we talk about where we rank relative to other states. And we're number 3 behind New York and New Jersey in terms of cases per capita. And so that really told us we had to come up with a phased, careful, data-driven approach to reopening. And there are a few fundamentals of the work, which I'll talk about. One is the idea that it had to be driven by public health metrics. And so the COVID Command Center has been reporting now for some time on a daily basis, what do the health metrics look like? And we thought as we get into reopening, let's try to be really clear about what are the indicators we're going to track. And we came up with a sort of red, yellow, green framework that talks about where we are on those metrics. So trying to determine what are the health indicators and how we're going to report them. That was a critical part of the strategy. Another was what level of guidance we're going to provide to businesses and to the general public. And we've had 3 levels of guidance now, what we call the overall social guidance around gathering sizes, as well as some things now which seem probably fairly common sense around maintaining distance, covering faces, hand washing, the kind of overall guidance to the public. That's a critically important part of our plan. The other was coming up with mandatory safety standards that would encompass all workplaces, all work environments. And the third was coming up with very specific industry protocols. And all this content, by the way, is on our mass.gov reopening site. But the guidance, in addition to the health data, was a really important part of the plan. The third item I'll talk about is this idea of a phased approach. And the whole concept was to reopen in phases and do it in a way we can get the economy open in a gradual way, but do it such that we're not going to have a resurgence of the virus that would then overwhelm the healthcare system. And so if you look at the report, it tries to be specific across 4 phases, what is going to open when. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're trying to be clear about what are the protocols that govern that reopening. But as you saw in phase 1, it was activities where there was not a lot of interaction with the public. So manufacturing and lab space, businesses like that are don't have a lot of contact intensity with the public. And as we get into phase 2 and 3, you saw restaurants and retail and other areas of the economy open. And so we're in the first part of phase 3 right now. And I'd say our results so far have been pretty good. One of the metrics we track is our positive test rate. When we started to reopen, that rate was about 10%. It's now just over 1%. And so we've managed to reopen big sectors of the economy today while seeing the health indicators actually improve pretty dramatically. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. I do think we developed a good plan, but I think also, one of the key elements of the plan, one of the key themes is shared responsibility, the idea that we all have a role to play here. And I think folks for the most part are playing that role really well, actually. And so taking to heart the social guidance, businesses have been great about adhering to the industry protocols. So I think we're certainly on a relative basis in a good spot. We've heard stories from all across the country about other states having a resurgence of the virus as they've reopened. That has not been our experience so far. There was an uptick kind of late July, early August timeframe, but our metrics continue to look pretty good right now. That said, it remains a very, very cautious time. Our third phase is called vigilant, and that's really exactly where we need to be. We need to really continue to be really, really careful now as we execute on the reopening process. Our phase 4, we've been calling the new normal, and it really does depend on a vaccine or a therapeutic or some kind of medical breakthrough to get us there. Now, what's in phase 4 are the things we deem to be the highest risk. So it's large arenas or bars or nightclubs and areas where there's just by its nature a lot of people gathering together. And so I think, frankly, it's going to be a little while until we get there. What that means and what it's meant now for the business community is that we've taken some very tough decisions informed by public health considerations, but we're cognizant always of the economic damage of taking those decisions. And it's frankly why, as Leslie alluded to, we decided back in March, we're going to have a weekly dialogue with the business community to inform them about decisions we're taking and hear what's on those minds. We've done those calls. It was weekly, March through July. We now do them on a bi-weekly basis, but it has been incredibly helpful for us to hear what's going on the ground with our business community. We also stood up very early on in the process an emergency loan product through our Mass Growth Capital Corporation. And then we're very active with our partners in the Small Business Administration and our banks on the Paycheck Protection Program and other products. There's been about $14 billion of capital that's come into the state from those federal programs. But we also recognize there are gaps, that not every small business has been served by those. And so the last thing I'll touch on is our plans going forward, and in particular, our economic development bill. So by way of background, in 2019, and Leslie was involved in this, as I mentioned, we came up with our economic development plan. Every new term of a governor requires a new economic development plan for the Commonwealth. And so we came up with that plan. And then typically what happens is what follows is an economic development bill. And the governor filed our bill on March 4th of this year. I mentioned the state of emergency was March 10th. So we had no idea as we were celebrating in Salem that day that we were filing a new bill, that the world was going to change pretty dramatically for all of us. But as we get into reopening and got deeper into the legislative session, we started to take a hard look at that bill and ask ourselves, what are the adjustments we may want to see to that bill to make it more responsive to the times we're in now? And the two themes we hit on were equity and recovery. We're in a moment now where we're dealing with a wide range of equity-related issues, and it's really incumbent on us to address those in as thoughtful manner as we can. And clearly on recovery, as we get into economic reopening, the next chapter of this book is economic recovery. How do we come up with a meaningful economic recovery strategy for the Commonwealth? And so what you'll see in the bill is, as far as we can tell, record levels of support for small business through a few different products, ramping up our efforts to provide capital to our community development financial institutions on the one hand, and then a micro loan product through Mass Growth Capital. And the final point I'll make is that the bill is a really, really important part of the strategy, but we'll have more to say about our broader economic recovery strategy as we go forward. But again, just being very mindful of the economic damage, particularly to our small companies, and we'll continue to endeavor to provide assistance through capital, technical assistance, and other means as we go forward here. But the dialogue with the business community has been incredibly important to developing our thinking. It will be incredibly important going forward. So I'll leave it there for now in terms of my comments, and look forward to everybody's questions.
Excellent. Mike, again, thank you so much. And Leslie's working on getting all the questions from the chat right now. But I just have a quick question for you just to sort of kick things off. So there are some relief programs that you had mentioned, and I saw an interview with you on Channel 5, the On the Record interview. Well done, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
But for our real estate sector, you had mentioned mortgage relief and rental relief programs, Irma and Raft, I believe.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about that? So for those, property management, real estate folks on the line, so that they can learn about these programs if they're not familiar with it.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up, Kyle. So we've had, by way of background, we've had an eviction moratorium in place that was due to expire this month. And then the governor extended that for 2 more months, so October 17th. We realize, and that frankly it is of great assistance to tenants who may be at risk of eviction. We recognize, frankly, it puts landlords and property owners, it could put them in a tough spot. I say that with the caveat that the moratorium does not absolve anybody of the obligation to pay rent. So folks ought to continue to be paying rent if they can. But what we've tried to do is come to the table with capital to help our tenants pay rent, which in turn then is of assistance to the landlord. So our RAF program, our rental assistance for families in transition, we've had that program for years now. What we've done is tried to provide or have provided more capital to that program. So that's an assistance program for families to pay rent. And then our IRMA, Emergency Rental and Mortgage Assistance Program, similar program which also helps folks address mortgage payments. Part of the rationale for extending the moratorium for 2 months is to develop the strategies that we'll need when the moratorium expires. And so we're spending a lot of time on that one right now. The 2 months also gives us more time to understand the scope of the problem. And so if you look at rental collections through the pandemic, it's been reasonably strong. Mostly what we're seeing is low 80s, low 80% or mid 80% types of collections. There's been a concern that as the $600 extra unemployment insurance payment goes away, we may see lower rent collections. And so by extending this to October, we get to see what September rent collections look like. We get to see what October looks like. We can help develop more strategies around bringing more capital into those programs. We're working with the courts now to try to define a process there. So we'll have more to say about that. But I do recognize it's an incredibly challenging time for our property owners. But I'm hopeful that the capital programs we have will be of some assistance.
That's excellent. And is there a specific website that property owners can go to get more information on that?
There is, and I don't have it on the top of my head, but we'll
okay.
So folks can get that. Yeah.
Sorry to hit you with a pop quiz.
No, not at all.
My other question for you before I turn it over to Leslie from the chat box is those weekly calls that you were having with the business community now bi-weekly. What were some of the biggest takeaways or things that you learned from those calls?
That's a great question. I would say a few things. One is the chambers of commerce have been incredibly important partners in all this, because it was clear right from the beginning that they were in close touch with their members. And so the calls, by the way, are for all the chambers of commerce across the Commonwealth. And so we had folks on the call that were clear. They were in very close touch with their members and relaying what was happening on the ground. And so that was very, very important. I will say as well, there was a recognition that while the decisions we took were very difficult economically, there was a realization that we just had to take these decisions because of the public health crisis. And that if we took some tough decisions now and got through this, we'd have a much more open economy now as we go forward. That was another one. Off the top of my head, I'll come back to the banks. The banks have played an incredibly important part of this process. The Paycheck Protection Program it posed a challenge in terms of the speed with which it was stood up and getting that capital through a channel where we're talking about volumes that are unprecedented. I think when I did some calculations early on, it was about 25 years of small business loans in a matter of weeks going through this distribution system. And so hats off to the banks who in some cases are working around the clock. So they've been really helpful calls and just hearing that perspective. And it's helped inform our view, for example, on not only do businesses need capital, they also need assistance. And so our Mass Growth Capital Corporation, working with the Mass Association of CDCs, stood up a 50 entity technical assistance network across the state, and that's been helpful as well. So they've been really helpful exercise for us, for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Leslie, should I turn it over to you? Do you have questions from the chat?
There is yes, thank you, Kyle. So there is a question from Darlene Wynn, who is the City of Beverly's city planner, and she is interested in the status of the CDBG CV Micro Enterprise Grant Program and the length of time it's taken to get that out. That's her first question. Second part is planning for restaurants in the fall and winter related to extending outdoor dining if possible. I know we've been talking about it here at the Chamber. We've been talking about it on our business task force about the fact that, you know, fall's going to come, the winter's going to come, everyone has to go inside, and then what? So I guess the first half of the question, the CDBG CV Micro Enterprise Grant Program, what's the length of time to get that money?
It's really soon. We had one allocation of CDBG money and then a second one. And so we tried to be thoughtful about what we're going to do with that money. But no, I think communities have been notified, or probably notified a while ago. I know it's in process right now as we speak. So you'll be seeing that really soon. I'm sorry, the second one was on restaurants?
Yeah, it's on restaurants. And I think there's a big, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it too, Mike. They're, you know, right now everyone is enjoying summer. We can enjoy a decent fall. But as soon as that weather snaps, what are we doing? Can you, how long are you going to extend outdoor dining for?
Well, I think that's much more dependent on the weather than any decisions we've made. It's and we've encouraged outdoor dining now for some time. There's a program called through our mascot, which are grants that can be used to help design outdoor places for dining. And so we'll continue to encourage that, but we're not going to say at any point you can't do it. I think it's much more dependent on the weather than it is any decision we're going to take.
I know Joan Lovely wants to make a comment, Senator Joan Lovely, so I'm going to let her do that. Senator, can you unmute yourself?
I can.
Hi. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. As always, this is a great chamber. I'd like to be able to attend as many meetings as possible because you're so supportive to your business community in Beverly. Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to say thank you for the responsiveness from your office, from the administration to the legislature has just been bar none. I mean, it really feels it's a real partnership as we are trying to get our way through this. And I know you've heard from my office quite a bit, you know, as we listen to constituents, especially some of the industries that are in phase 4, like restaurant arcades and the wedding venues. Boy, are we hearing from wedding venues. And we know it's very difficult to be able to, you know, to get the wedding venues up and going. Just because of the sheer size of, you know, but even my own son, he and his bride canceled their wedding till next year, although they did decide to get married with 10 of us as witnesses, and it was a beautiful little ceremony, and they'll have their big celebration next year. So it was a disappointment, but necessary. And, you know, just something we have to do. But
yeah, that's right. That's right.
The administration's just been terrific as we really all try to navigate this together and get through it. As you said, vaccine, therapeutics, whatever it's going to take to be able to completely reopen the economy. I was in the State House yesterday. I ran the Senate session and it's empty. And that building, you know, is so alive.
I know.
But it isn't right now, and it's difficult. So I know it is for everybody here, and we're here again to assist, but thanks for your great work.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thanks for the kind words, and grateful as always for your partnership and the partnership with the whole legislature. And it's been very important collaboration here. So thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Secretary, Mayor Michael Cahill would like to say a few words as well. So Mayor, please feel free to unmute yourself. And thanks for joining us this morning. And thank you, Senator Lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Thanks, Senator.
Welcome. Thank you.
And Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you. I want to acknowledge one of our city councilors, Todd Rotunda, was in the meeting as well.
Yeah.
I think, Mr. Secretary, the gist of Darlene's question on the outdoor dining is that we understand that the guidance from the state allows for indoor dining through November 1st. We at the local level initially passed it through December 31st, thinking and hoping that eventually you folks will extend it. And I don't know if that's with the help of the legislature or what, but I'm trying to remember how it went. But I think we're going to be pushing to keep, kind of keep promoting people dining outdoors as long as we can.
Yeah.
I was in Copenhagen a few years ago, Thanksgiving week, and we ate outdoors several times. They toss blankets on every chair. People sit with hats and gloves on outdoors and heaters and have a great time. And I don't know that we'll be providing blankets with the virus, but maybe it's a bring your own blanket kind of thing, a BYOB. But I think anything we can do to we're New Englanders and we claim to be hardy, but I think we're big wimps when it comes to sitting in the cold. So I think it's something we can all get behind and try to promote, because it really is. A lot of people aren't willing to go indoors to dine yet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we're going to be, as a state, promoting indoor dining come flu season. It's a bit of a crystal ball thing, but anything we can do to promote and support outdoor dining as deep into the year, as far into the late fall, early winter as we can.
Yeah.
I think is in all of our interest.
That's a great comment, Mayor. Thank you. A really good comment. We'll take a hard look at that one. Thank you.
We actually did get a question, a follow-up to Darlene's about the funding, about allocating the funding to the communities. And this person said that they were told that it was based on gateway status. Can you comment on that, as far as who gets it first or how much?
Sorry, which funding is that?
The CB, I think it was the
CDBG.
Yeah.
Well, there was an initial round way back when for what's called the entitlement communities, and that was directly funded by the federal government to those communities. And now there's been 2 rounds of state funding, which we've allocated. And so everybody should have been notified by now what the funding is. And I think it's just in process now of getting the money out the door.
Now,
Leslie, if I could just clarify, we in Beverly, we are a non-entitlement community.
Yeah.
So we had to wait on a second pot, and when the state made money available to non-entitlement communities, we participated in a regional application that MAPC submitted. We've got roughly $250,000 to work with. We've been given our award. It's just that we haven't been given the green light yet, Mr. Secretary, to put the application on the street for the small. This is a grant opportunity for micro businesses in Beverly, 5 FTEs or fewer. It's not a huge sum of money. We have, if I remember Darlene explaining it to me, we have about 1,300 businesses that fit that category. We will probably be able to work with somewhere between 25, 30 to 40 businesses at most, but it's really a question of kind of moving along with the application and the award process down to the businesses.
Okay, Mayor, I'll check in on that one in more detail.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Secretary, we got a question that was submitted actually yesterday. It was really about the tourist related industries, and as Senator Lovely touched upon, the wedding venues, et cetera, all those, the banquet facilities, the hotels, et cetera. Yeah. Is there an opportunity, sort of the way the PPP loan helped many small businesses? Is there a specific fund set up so that these businesses can actually apply for some kind of loans just for them, to help them continue to keep going to some degree? I mean, I'm sure they've laid off. I think about the Danvers Port, obviously it's like the biggest venue in our area. And I mean, they've lost 80% of their business. I mean, how are you to survive?
No, I understand. It's we don't have a specific fund right now for those companies, but we do have, as I mentioned, the Economic Development Bill, about $50 million of capital for small businesses. And so that bill is before the legislature now, and we're hopeful we'll have that capital to put to work at some point soon. So it's a general pool of money, actually 2 different pools of money to make up the 50. But we recognize it's just been incredibly challenging for those venues. And I will say, if you look at the resurgence of the virus that some states have experienced, it really tends to be not about specific workplaces opening, but much more around gatherings. And so that has really informed our thinking about phase 4 and even the latter part of phase 3 now. It's just, we just have to avoid large gatherings at this point.
Another question that's been coming up is, everyone's talking about, will we be wearing masks forever? So there's been, and who knows, right? Because no one has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, is at your level, has there been discussion about mandating the kind of cleaning that's expected of businesses from now until forever? Because that adds another level to a business process, whether it's a hair salon, a restaurant, a bank, a chamber,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah.
Have you been having those conversations like this is here to stay?
Well, in terms of here to stay or not, I don't have a crystal ball on that one, but I will say what we tried to do is be really clear in these industry protocols and best practices, by industry, what the standards are. And so as we reopen various sectors, we will roll out new standards and protocols for those. I think you mentioned salon. So if you go on our website, you'll see a whole set of protocols for how to operate a salon under these new standards. And that does include cleaning and distancing and face coverings and so forth. So I don't know how long we're going to be in this mode, but while we are here, we've tried to be really clear about what we think that the best practices and protocols ought to be.
Let me also say, of course, everyone's talking about, a resurgence. Again, no one has a crystal ball. We've seen other states that have opened their schools, and now there's a resurgence and the schools are closing. So, Massachusetts has been very strong, as you know, and being in the center of it, to put your foot down. The state has put its foot down. If there's an uptick, et cetera, you're watching it like a hawk.
Yeah.
So do you feel, should there be a resurgence when we're opening schools? Gloucester's going back to school. I'm up in Gloucester. I was surprised to hear that, but they are. Okay. So everyone around us is going remote. But should there be a resurgence, do you feel as though the state is better prepared? And what is that going to look like, do you think? I mean, obviously, you're probably going to say it's based on the numbers and the data that you see. But would you see it, I suppose it depends on how sharply the rise is, going right back to phase one, because I think everybody's going, oh, God, here we go.
I certainly hope not. I mean, we'll certainly be better prepared if we get there. The whole strategy was based on, excuse me, on trying to prevent that. And so to reopen in a thoughtful way with careful protocols, hopefully we can keep reopening and prevent going back there. But we did say in the report that, we have this phased approach, and there's some thought that, if things do get bad, we may have to go back to earlier phases. And that could be specific to a region or specific to an industry. And so some of the thinking is embedded in the plan, but really a lot of our thinking in developing the strategy was to say, look, let's get things reopened in a phased, data-driven way and try to prevent that resurgence. We do have better and better data all the time between our testing strategy, our contact tracing strategy. And so we understand more and more, where the virus is happening. And so that would inform, I think, any strategy we need to develop around going back a phase. But I will just say we certainly hope we don't have to get there for sure.
I know that gyms took a huge hit as well, just as the tourism and wedding industry did. What are your thoughts about the fact that, churches were able to open, but gyms weren't? That was certainly a question that we got from someone. Please feel free to comment on that.
Well, I think the governor's been pretty open about that one, that the churches was a constitutional issue in a lot of ways. And so I understand it may look like there's a disparity between some things being open and others not. The gyms, of course, are open now, but no, there was a constitutional issue there around the churches for sure. But they are open with protocols like everything else at this point.
Now, I know that a lot of local communities are starting their own marketing plans to create a buzz that their businesses are open, that their businesses are safe, that we're welcoming you back. Beverly's starting one. Salem's been doing it. I'm sure others across, and Newburyport was doing it, and I'm sure many, many other communities across the Commonwealth have created their own marketing plans. What about the state's plan? I know I had mentioned this to you a while back, in one of the conference calls, just in a general sense. Is there a plan? Is there a plan?
There is a plan. It's funny you should talk about this today because the plan will be announced today.
Oh, awesome.
And so the governor will be announcing a campaign called My Local Massachusetts. And it'll start really launching around the tax-free weekend this Saturday and Sunday, but will continue throughout the year. and really encouraging folks to shop and buy locally. So there'll be more to come on that now in a few hours.
That's great. Tell me, what in your position, and just being out in the community, we've all been out in the community, most people have started to venture out, et cetera, et cetera. What's been the most positive thing that you've seen? And then what's been the most frustrating from your point of view during all of this?
I think the most positive has been the way people have really reacted creatively to this new environment. And we talked about outdoor dining before, the way people have implemented that and been thoughtful about it. It's been great to see. I think, our small businesses are as always, are nimble and thoughtful and get things done in a creative way. And that's been terrific to see. And it's just been, you really can't say enough about the way the business community has rallied here, the way the small businesses have adapted. I mentioned the banks. We have a program called our Manufacturing Emergency Response Team, where we early on recognized, and we had a shortage of personal protective equipment, encouraged our manufacturers to repurpose their production lines and start making masks and gowns and face shields. We have 50 companies doing that now, and they made 5.5 million pieces of PPE. So again, a great example of businesses, rallying to the cause and recognizing that they've got real needs here. So it's been inspiring to see the way the business community has, on the one hand, adapted their operations and really understood this new environment we're in. The frustrating side of things, I'll be honest, the economic challenges we have, the solution set probably far exceeds the state balance sheet. And I've said that before in our business calls. Thankfully we got $14-15 billion of federal capital that's come in. But in terms of, I think what we need to do long-term, we'll be stretched as a state to do that. I think we all recognize that the federal government's balance sheet's a lot bigger than ours. And so we're going to try to be as smart and thoughtful as we can with the capital we have. But this will be a difficult time economically for some period of time. And it'll, as we talked about, require that close collaboration between the executive branch and the legislature and municipal leadership and the federal government as well. So we're all in this together for a period of time.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. I think there was actually a question about the 2022 and 2023 budgets. I mean, have you already started to talk about, like you just sort of touched upon, in the future, how long is it going to take us to rebound? And does the state have a plan to replenish the unemployment fund? We can't count on the federal government to necessarily bail us out.
That's true. That's true. It's a very, very challenging time for the budget for sure. And we produce operating budgets, in 1 year increments versus multi-year. We'll obviously continue to work very closely with our legislative partners on that and track the availability of federal funds. We do have an interim budget that the legislature passed and the governor signed, which gets us through October. But as a state, unlike the federal government, we have to have a balanced budget. And so we're doing so in an environment that's very volatile and hard to predict. And so we'll just continue to monitor the overall economy, what tax receipts look like, what federal response there might be, and work in close concert with our partners in the legislature and produce that balanced budget. But it's there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's a very, very challenging time to be producing operating budgets for the state.
Are you worried about the future of retail in the state? I mean, obviously the future of retail in general has been on people's minds for the last 5 or 6 years, absolutely. But what are your thoughts about retail and what that's going to look like?
Really good question. We are concerned about it. Retailers in physical locations as opposed to online locations had a set of challenges long before the pandemic, right? And so as we think about, I've been calling these our Main Street businesses, right? That they had challenges pre-pandemic, and the pandemic has probably accelerated some of those challenges. So we are concerned about it. And I think as we think about the tools in the economic development toolbox around community development and downtown development, we have to be thoughtful about how we deploy those for sure. We've always had a strong focus on downtowns. And so how do we put to work, capital programs and assistance programs to help develop our downtowns further, recognizing those businesses face challenges that weren't there before, or they are here now on a different scale. So we are concerned about it, and it will require a lot of close collaboration with our municipal leaders to see us through that. In our economic development bill, there's some capital programs for helping to bring back to life underutilized or abandoned buildings, for example. And we recognize it can provide a huge boost to a local economy to just get more activity in the downtown. Part of the housing strategy has been around that as well, trying to develop more housing in our downtown. So we are concerned about it for sure, but hopefully we've got the right capital programs and right level of collaboration to see us through that.
You know, one of the things that I learned that I really enjoyed hearing about, being on that economic advisory council for the short time that I was on it for our mission. I loved how everyone around the representatives from around the state were talking about clusters of cities in creating smaller, and when I say cities, just, you know, having that live, work, you know, capability.
Yep.
Instead of being way out in the burbs, that you actually, like Beverly is a great example. Salem is a great example. And how they were trying to create that even at the western part of the state. And what does that mean for Boston? People out here might not care, but have you noticed that there is that trend? There's all this building going on. I mean, Beverly's booming, Lynn is booming, Peabody's booming. They're getting, you know, more housing, et cetera. So
Yep.
What are your thoughts about that, especially in this economy? Will that help that idea of the smaller clusters of city where there's a lot going on and you don't have to go into the city to work and to live, if you will? So yeah, what are your thoughts about that, considering where we are right now?
I think it's a really good point. You look at, you know, in Beverly under Mayor Cahill's great leadership, and Salem, Mayor Driscoll, and Lynn and Mayor McGee, and just the work that this region has done, the mayors in the region have done around housing development and developing downtowns. I mean, that's a strategy that's working, and it's a strategy that perhaps is even more important now, as you mentioned. So I think it's going to really be incumbent on all of us to look at what's worked over the last few years and try to do it, you know, perhaps at greater scale and certainly with greater urgency. But no, I think the playbook in the cities you mentioned, and Beverly in particular, perhaps it's really worked great, and I think it will be more important going forward.
Thank you for that. I just got a comment coming in through the chat. Is Andrew DeFranza still with us on the call? And if he is, would he like to weigh in on any housing issues? I don't know if he's still with us because I saw him say thank you and I wasn't sure if he said goodbye. Let me just see if he's still not there. What do you think some of the strongest, what have you seen some of the strongest industries emerging during this pandemic that surprises you?
That surprised me? It's not a surprise so much, but you think about our life sciences industry and what that means. I mean, we have arguably the world's strongest life sciences cluster. And we have 50 companies now in Massachusetts working on vaccines and therapeutics. And I'm not surprised by that, but it's worth remarking on I mean, how lucky we are to be here in Massachusetts. We have a world-class healthcare system. We're a world leader in life sciences. I think that will help us in so many ways. It'll help the world deal with this pandemic, but it will certainly help us economically. And one thing we're hearing a lot about now is how companies may be rethinking their supply chains. And so we've had a strong focus now on manufacturing in Massachusetts through the last 5 years, through the Life Sciences Center, through the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative, our efforts around the Manufacturing Emergency Response Team I mentioned. So I think perhaps on a positive note, the fact that we have had such a strong focus on advanced manufacturing, and we do have this world-leading life sciences cluster, I think that's going to be a really unique source of economic strength for us going forward.
Thank you for that. We just got another question through the chat. There's been an increased appreciation for critical role of that childcare plays in our economy. Many providers have not survived or been positioned to reopen. How is childcare positioned in the economic development bill? That's a great question because I have kids. I'm lucky I can stay at home, but not everybody can do that.
Right. Well, let me say a couple of things on that. Part of our work around the reopening plan was to look at what we call the enablers of getting back to work. Public transportation, there's a lot in the plan around how public transportation should operate in this new environment. And childcare is clearly one of them as well. And so we stood up, the childcare centers were closed back in March. We stood up an emergency childcare system with about 10,000 seats, if you will. And then childcare now is sort of gradually coming back online. But it is frankly among the most challenging elements of the plan is getting childcare to come back online in sufficient capacity under these new protocols. The protocols, safety protocols probably mean that by its definition, there's a lower capacity than it was before, but it's been an incredibly challenging time for these operators financially as well. There is the thought that through our CDFI program, there could be loans available to childcare providers, but we got some more work to do on that one for sure. I mean, there's, I think about, I want to say about 10,000 providers are now back online, but we've got a long way to go to get that community back to full strength for sure.
I have a question about mass hire, which is, the career centers around the state. And I know Salem has a very strong chapter and office, but I'm curious to know, has there been any discussion with Secretary Acosta, for instance, for workforce and labor, about extending the hours of those offices to help more people if they need it, especially now if they need help with their resumes, if they need career coaching, et cetera, especially with unemployment so high?
We have talked about that, and we talked about how those centers can be positioned differently or operate differently. We've talked about are there ways to use online tools to help with reskilling. So I mentioned this overall recovery plan we're contemplating. Workforce has to be a really important part of that. We've had, I think, to the workforce skills cabinet, was something the governor started early in the first term. So it's the Secretary of Economic Development, Labor, and Education. That work has been, I think, pretty successful, albeit in a very different environment. And the thought there was get the three secretaries together and focus on skills gaps around the state. And we were doing this in a very low unemployment environment where there was a need to bring more talent into different sectors like advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and IT, trying to create greater alignment between community colleges and vocational technical high schools on the one hand and industry on the other. And so we have a pretty well-established strategy there. And I think we need to think about how do we continue that just in a very different environment. Back on March 4th, when we filed the Economic Development Bill, our unemployment rate was 2.9%. It's 16% today. And so there's a lot more urgency around these workforce skills issues for sure.
And I know we only have a few minutes left. We have about 7 minutes left. So if anyone has another question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to comment on, again, going back to that Economic Advisory Council that I served on, it was a short-term council. I really appreciated it. I did a lot of listening. And it was so great to hear from people from around the Commonwealth and what their challenges are. And you mentioned the skills gap, which gets back to education. Yep. I don't know how closely you work with the Secretary of Education, if you're involved in all those discussions. I know there's discussion, and certainly maybe Senator Lovely wants to jump in on this one. There was discussion about holding off on NCAS for about 4 years because of the pandemic and because of what's happening, which I'm actually in favor of, only because it seems like there's been so much teaching to the test that a lot of the creativity that is so needed in today's economy has been stifled. And I'm just curious if you have a thought about it. I know you're not the Secretary of Education, but I see how economic development and education are so closely tied to the future of our nation, of our Commonwealth, that creativity. I'm curious. I mean, it will be what it will be at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't have a specific comment on the MCAS, but certainly what you allude to is the importance of education to our economy long term. Where my secretariat intersects with education is really around these vocational programs and helping to create, as I mentioned, that alignment between vocational education and the needs of industry, and do that on a regional basis. So I don't have a comment on MCAS for you today, but that's where my work tends to intersect with education.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I hope that everyone feels that this has been extremely helpful. I know that allowing our chamber members to have a place at the table with you, Mike, is so important. Like I said at the beginning of this, the communication and the transparency and the willingness to listen and to really hear what businesses are saying from all across the state. I think everyone understands you are one person and you can only do what you can do. And that's why you have a team of people behind you. But the fact that you gave us this opportunity and are even here today, I know I'm very grateful. And for any of the opportunities that I've been given to sit with you and serve with you has been, it's been just a really great learning experience. So I hope people at the table today feel the same way. So if anyone has a last minute comment, please let me know. Do you have any final thoughts, Mike?
Sure. I mean, Leslie, thanks so much for the chance to be with you all today. You know, I've mentioned this economic development bill a couple of times in our plan. Our plan is called Partnerships for Growth. And we use that word purposely because it really is how we all tend to work together in partnership to get things done. Our partnership with the legislature, our partnership with municipal leaders, our partnership with the business community, and we developed this plan in the bill, and obviously very different times, but going forward now, those partnerships are going to be more important than ever. And so this kind of dialogue is really important for all of us, and we'll all keep talking and keep working closely, and we'll get through this together.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that we can do this again, maybe in a few months. That would be great, depending on what's happening, of course, in the world.
Yep.
I hope we get to see you in person at some point,
Yeah.
Again. And I want to thank North Shore Bank and the Government Affairs Committee and all of our elected officials who were on the call today. And again, this has been recorded and I will make sure that we get it out there. So thank you again. On behalf of the Greater Beverly Chamber of Commerce, I'm Leslie Gould, the Executive Director, and I know my assistant Robin Foster was also on the call as well. So thank you, everyone. Really, really appreciate it today. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Have a great
really
day, everybody.
Appreciate
Thanks.
your time.